What's up? Day 4 live streaming. We're starting off a little bit different today. I know we've been covering a lot of AI news, my reactions to it, sharing some thoughts, opinions. Just going to kind of let this one roll. I want to commit to doing this. I think this is a little bit of a different approach than you would see in most AI spaces, and that is I'm going to be listening to Luke Smith right now, who is a really smart dude, academic background, I believe PhD, rejected all of it. I guess he lives in the country now and makes his money online. Became Eastern Orthodox Christian. But his background is very good for this space. That's because he has a very big technological background. I believe he knows, coding. If you go back at some of his older videos and stuff, you can find that he's like a big proponent for Linux and open software and really big in the software space. And that's kind of how he built up his following over time. And now he's taken a radically different approach over the years and has a very interesting perspective in regards to where AI is going, technology, things of that nature. And I think he's definitely worth listening to.
Luxuriant, it's very tempting, but it's a poison you don't want to have too much of. And it's, especially in today's world, it's all over the place. Now, nostalgia is unique to our environment. Now, everyone in all times and places, they have some pining for their childhood, or, oh, I missed that. I missed when that was here. And, I missed when we used to do that. It's very natural. But in our world, if you really think about it, the modern consumerist world, it is a perfect storm for this nostalgia that blinds everything, because, there's 90s nostalgia, there's 80s nostalgia, and there's 70s nostalgia. Every generation, or not even every generation, every couple of years, the toys that kids play with are totally different. The social environment is entirely different. When I was in high school, it was the era of flip phones, an era that came and went very quickly. And, just a couple of years later, there were no more flip phones. Now there are smartphones. The dynamic is entirely different. Obviously, now people are sharing pictures and, all this other stuff. And that actually fundamentally transforms the way that people interact. So it's actually very normal in the modern West, especially for a generation of people. Like, if you know someone who's 10 years younger than you, the games they played, the ways they interacted with their friends are entirely different from the ways that you interacted with your friends. And in each case, there's no continuity, there's no stability, right? So it's not like, oh yeah, I don't know, girls play with dolls and boys do this. I don't know, they play with sticks and hit each other. It's not like this thing that is going to be common among generations. It's something that actually changes all the time. And what that means is you can't go back.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point he's touching on here.
Back and experience that again. Your children are not going to have the same experiences that you had. Okay. And, and
we have a big generational disconnect because of that. With the advancements in technology, I wouldn't necessarily say advancements, but the change in culture has caused this generational gap. And it's like the fourth turning or something like that. There's a term for it that somebody came up with. It's researched and well documented. Either way, essentially means that generations that are too far apart from each other start causing some tension, and then there's a big change that's coming in society that's even bigger than the disconnect between the two of them, or three of them, whatever it may be. So we currently have that with technology and every other thing in society, the way that we communicate and talk. And just think of the new slang terms that are dropped, every generation, it seems. I know when I was in high school, we had our own certain words we would use. I'm sure you can relate to that. And it's certainly the case now, right? Lit, low key. Where the fuck did these words come from? It's a new language in a way, right? So It's quite interesting, and he's hitting on something really good because you get stuck in this pattern of nostalgia based in too much of your identity on the past. I don't know. We'll see where he's going.
It's like a guy who, let's say he really likes his Zelda games, like his Nintendo 64, and he's like, oh yeah, my kid's gonna play video games and he's gonna like that too, and it's not really the same thing because this game, it's not impressive anymore. It's old fashioned. Compared to the other slop that I can consume, it's actually not attractive. And so what that means is, all of us are in a weird position where the things that we enjoyed as kids are just gone. They're just dead. They're the things that appear in like autistic people's collections of stuff.
Funko Pops is the first thing that came to my mind. That's hilarious.
Here's and I still, like, every once in a while I still remember things from my childhood, and it's like it's an entirely lost world, because the modern world, the consumerist world, is very much about new things and faddish things that aren't going to last, things that you get very emotionally attached to, and then they disappear, then they're gone, and all your emotional attachment was for nothing. And that actually is kind of the problem. Now, I mentioned video games. I think video games are a fantastic example. Obviously, I think really people should never be playing video games, especially as individuals. If you're in a party and you're playing with other guys, I kind of understand that. But I think I look at all the time that I wasted as a kid, and it's a killer. But one thing that I think is really funny, nowadays, and this shows you the poison of nostalgia, because ultimately, people, when they see that the world they grew up in is gone, is lost, there's a part of them, they want to relive it. They want to relive that experience. They want to go back and have those feelings again. And you can't do it. You can't do it, not just because the world has gone past that, but even the enjoyment itself is superficial. Video games are a good example. Let me give you one. In video games nowadays, don't even look this stuff up. I know a lot of people probably know about it, but there's this stuff called video game speedrunning, right? Which is the most depressing and degenerate thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Because the whole, really what's happening there is there are guys, again, they like some old video game, and they played it a lot as children. Now they're adults, and they have nothing to do. Their lives are empty. So they play the game over and over again. They optimize it. They try to speedrun it. And then sometimes they'll even hack into the game, change things around, create new challenges for themselves. So 25 years later, they're still trying to they're taking this game from the 80s or the 90s, and they're trying to relive the experience they had as a kid, right? And that's what I mean by nostalgia can be a real poison in today's society. By itself, it's not really dangerous. There's nothing wrong with looking back at the past and remembering the good old days. But really, we should live in a place where, you should be able to go back to the school you used to go to and, kind of see the kids are different, but it's still the same. That's not the case anymore. In our world of rapid change, rapid technological change, mass immigration, all these kind of things, like the world, the world we grew up in is constantly dying. There's memes that guys have, the world you grew up in is gone. It's constantly going. It's constantly leaving. And even at the rate, the reason this stuff is such a poison, it really, part of growing up in today's world is kind of getting over those old obsessions. And, obviously I struggle with this. When I remember, I have rose tinted glasses about a lot of the things in, my early childhood or something like that. But I think a lot of it is you have to keep looking forward, and ultimately, my priority, I think, is,
got to keep looking forward. Always keep going forward, baby. That's all you can do. Be here in the now, solve the problems right in front of you. That's all that matters.
Living in a more stable world. I've said this in another video, but that's something that people overlook. And so this stuff, don't get in. The real thing is, you want those experiences, like you want the feeling of continuity, and to look at children and to look at the next generation and say, hey, I've been there, I've done that, I relate to that. But the world as it is now has taken that away from us because of technological, spiritual, all kinds of change. That's a
That's a big issue that I've talked about a lot, is the huge disconnect between families and the wisdom that's lost. It's not even so much education, like proper education in terms of grading, reading, academics, but more so life education. And you hear this all the time with people. I know that my generation, a big thing that we would say is like, they didn't teach us taxes. They didn't teach us how to do this in our lives, which I want to challenge a little bit more, because I wasn't necessarily the most engaged student, but I wasn't a horrible student. I did literally the bare minimum that I could, just to graduate. And I was like a C student. Really did not like school, like in that regard. I just enjoyed the social aspect of it. Anyway, um, where I was getting at is, when I was in high school, I took a class on taxes. I took like one of my classes was personal finance, and you could, um, take like do personal taxes, and they taught you how to do that. They taught you how to use the software. I was exposed to Dave Ramsey in my high school in this class. So now, to be fair, it may have been an elective, but still, I think a lot more people had opportunities to learn this in school and they didn't, but that's okay. Besides the point, it should be taught widely, and mandatory if it's going to be taught in schools, although I believe that is on the parents to teach their children. Anyway, yeah, there's just a huge disconnect with real knowledge, how to live life, what we should be doing. That's a major issue, but AI could help fix that in some ways, which I proposed in one of the podcast episodes that will be coming out. Is just that we can reclaim some of that lost wisdom through AI. It may not be the same, but at least the information will be there. And by be the same, in the way it's delivered, the way it's received, how we remember it, the impact, the influence, because depending on who delivers the message, it can impact and influence people in a myriad of ways.
It's a bad thing, because we're so disconnected from every the generation before us and the generation after that. There's an inherent value in that, and we want to have some of that, but we can't have it. Nostalgia is just a feeling of loss. It's a feeling of I can't get that back, and it's very sad. And how we have to cope in a way is just kind of order our priorities. And there are a lot of the little things in your past that are they're gonna disappear, and it might hurt, but it doesn't matter. And you need to get over. You need to, I don't know, pull away from the video game speed running, or your video game speed running, whatever that is, and focus on the stuff that matters. However, and I think really the way to do that is identifying what's really going on. Like we want continuity. We want to have parts of our childhood in the future, because that means that we have a future that we can understand and control and have a say in. And the modern world, modern consumerism, this is very much not that. So anyway, that's all I got to say.
Interesting. I want to listen to another videos. I know he has a newer one that's on AI specifically. Yeah, there's a nothing burger. You're wrong. Yeah, I listened to that one already. Yeah, because he hadn't posted in like 2 years. So when he made his return, people were very surprised and happy. Let's see here. I guess let's see what this video is about.
There's this kind of weird argument that a lot of atheists have taken from the work of David Hume, arch skeptic. He was probably an atheist himself, nearly certainly was, but Hume has this argument that people will say is supposed to be against miracles. It's people will say, oh, maybe miraculous things could happen. David Hume has this argument for why they don't, or at least that's what it's quoted as, although it's not that. David Hume, fundamentally, he was a skeptic who followed his skepticism to its logical conclusion, and that is ultimately we can't really have knowledge of anything. That's just how it is. You can't be halfway a skeptic. You have to apply that to the most extreme degree. But either way, here's what Hume's alleged argument against miracles is. He says this, okay? Imagine, so let's say something miraculous happens. Let's say someone rises from the dead. I think that's
Dude, it's always wild. The most base people on the internet, when they show their face and they make content, it's usually in the woods somewhere. It's kind of interesting, right? The closer you are to nature, the more base you become.
the original example.
But that's after being in the beast system, right? That's a whole other thing. I know I'm kind of going off of normal content, but
He's talking about the resurrection of Christ or something like that. Imagine you see someone resurrect from the dead. That's your observation. Okay, that's your empirical sense data. Now, you're faced with a question. Whenever you see something that's unlikely or allegedly miraculous, you are faced with two choices implicitly, whether you realize it or not. One is you could believe what you just saw, or the other one is you could kind of out of a plausibility judgment or a statistical judgment, you could induce that you have misperceived the alleged miracle. And what Hume says is that every time, I mean, more or less, every time we have a normal, non-miraculous experience of life, you observe, for example, when humans die, they stay dead. They don't rise from the dead, right? That is that is a statistical. I mean, let's say you can have a Bayesian algorithm that is integrating that information every time you learn. Okay, another person died, they didn't rise from the dead. Another person died, they didn't rise from the dead. Another person died, they didn't rise from the dead, right? And as time goes on, you eventually become very much convinced that people don't rise from the dead. So Hume more or less said, he wasn't talking about Bayesian anything or whatever, but Hume's argument is more or less, okay, well, if you have kind of an established way that the universe works, when people die, they don't rise from the dead, and you see a contradiction to that, that there's always a stronger case to make for believing that your own senses are in error, right? So therefore, you shouldn't believe this. You shouldn't believe, if you see someone rising from the dead, you shouldn't believe it, right? Even if you see it with your own eyes, because you are implicitly saying the entire architecture of the universe has been subverted. And, rather than just, admitting kind of what you see. Now, it's important to note that this argument, even though it's kind of portrayed as an argument against miracles, it's not an argument against miracles. It's actually an argument against believing in miracles. And those are two utterly different things, because Hume ultimately is not saying or even arguing that miracles are impossible. In fact, you could say this in any other. I mean, a really good example, I think.
Yeah, because you still leave the door open to the possibility of it happening. Just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it hasn't happened or couldn't happen. The potential for it to happen could still be valid.
That talks about, I guess, the problem of induction, kind of philosophical problems is, Nassim Taleb has this, what he calls the turkey problem, right? So imagine a different situation. You are a turkey. You're a turkey scientist. And you're on a turkey farm with a bunch of, there's a farmer and there's a whole bunch of turkeys. So every day you wake up and the farmer feeds you. And he feeds you breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know how often turkeys eat. He always takes care of you and all the other turkeys every day. If a turkey is sick, he nurses them to health. And so every day you are given some statistical fact, and the statistical, or let's say you are led to an inductive conclusion. The inductive conclusion is that farmers love turkeys. They feed us. They do all these great things. And every single day you wake up and you get more and more evidence to the fact that farmers just love turkeys. So a widely debunked conspiracy theorist turkey might say, I think the farmer's going to kill us. I think that the farmer actually plans eventually to kill the turkeys. And you can put on your Redditor fedora and say, no, actually,
that meme has been going viral over TikTok too. It's kind of funny.
My Bayesian statistics, my inductive reasoning have led me to think that every single day we have more and more and more and more evidence that the farmer loves turkeys, right? Farmer just loves turkeys. He wants to keep us alive. He really genuinely cares for us. Now, eventually there's going to come a day that the farmer, Thanksgiving is coming, and the farmer is going to kill all the turkeys. He's going to kill the nerd turkey who said all this stuff. And the nerd turkey is going to be, there's going to be a Thanksgiving meal. His little turkey ghost is going to be floating above the table, and he's going to say, well, still, he believes Hume's argument. He's going to say, I still have more reason to believe that I'm just perceiving this the wrong way, because all the evidence says that, people love, or farmers love turkeys, right? Now, obviously, that's a pretty absurd example, but it's important to remember that, that kind of skepticism is really setting you up to say that there's nothing outside of, let's say, there's nothing unpredictable about the world. Yeah. The architecture of the universe, I fully understand. Nothing else. It's not even about miracles.
It's a very arrogant position
themselves. It's about anything unexpected couldn't possibly happen. When you're making this argument against even miracles, the word miracle, ultimately, you can think of it as just any kind of unlikely event, right? Or any event that we don't understand exactly the scientific or the kind of material origin of it. It's just how it is. If the entire universe is, just like a water droplet on a leaf in a bigger universe, and someone walks by it and shakes our water droplet, it's going to affect our universe in totally unpredictable, untestable, unempirical ways, that we can't replicate in a scientific setting. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? It still happened. It is a miracle on the scale of that universe. That's just how it is.
You want more clients? You think you can scale your business on excuses?
I think at the same time, I've said, there's, just to cite people that Redditors like, back in Carl Sagan's old, documentary series, on Cosmos, whatever it is, which of course Black Science Man redid and made it even worse. But
that's hilarious. Doesn't even call him his name. That's hilarious, and everybody knows who he's talking about. That's great.
There's this one episode where he talks about basically, the fact that we live in a universe where we can have science and where we can have life, because let's say the universe is not perfectly stable, but it also isn't too chaotic, right? So it's really, we can have science because, you need some kind of systematicity that you can test, but there also has to be variability that you can test. And by the same way, in order to have life, you can't have a perfectly static universe, and you can't have a perfectly chaotic universe. You have to have somewhere in between. So isn't it nice that we live somewhere in between? But I think really the thing to look at is, let's say, natural features of the universe, scientific, in truth, our universe is a mix of both. We have some things that are incredibly predictable, and we have some things that are incredibly chaotic. It's not an either or kind of thing. It's not as if we live, I don't know, it's just inaccurate to say that we live in an either or thing. In reality, there are some things that are just so unlikely. So they're there, but they're so infrequent that, like the turkey problem or like someone rising from the dead, it's always going to seem like a miracle when it actually happens. And that's just how it is. There's no reason, when you say something like you can't expect unlikely or miraculous things to happen, you're really just ruling out an entire part of reality, right? So when you see people who are talking about kind of they're dismissing things that might be quote unquote miraculous or quote unquote paranormal or whatever, it's important to realize that there can be interactions to reality that don't work exactly in the way we understand. That's just it's almost a tautology. This should almost be trivially true. But I think there's a tendency of people in the modern world to paint the world in there's the physical and there's the metaphysical. It's the magical stuff. And it's just people just believe magical stuff. And sometimes they do for funny reasons, but you can't really rule out, you can't artificially declare what is real and what isn't beforehand. An example I've used in one of the articles on my website is, gravity. Gravity is a good example of something where, before the theory of gravity, gravity ultimately it's a mathematical solution to a physical problem, but the force itself is utterly occult. We don't understand, we've never understood how gravity works. We can describe how it works, but the force behind it is it literally is paranormal. It's like force exerts itself at a distance. That is pseudoscience in the definition of the mechanistic universe that people had for, thousands of years, basically. That is like occult. But we're now just used to the fact that it exists, and it solves for problem. It solves for why the planets, move in a loop and why things fall to the earth. Those are seemingly disparate facts, but the theory of gravity integrates those things. So I don't think we should necessarily dismiss other similar, like the possibility of other similar unifications of different phenomena, or say, oh, it's paranormal, so we can't consider it, because gravity is paranormal. Science is mostly paranormal. You just see it over and over again, and then it starts seeming normal, but it's still just as weird.
Yeah, by its literal definition.
Anyway, I gotta get inside. My hands are kind of cold, but that's about all I wanted to say.
All right. I'll be right back. Changing the shorts, but it's too cold. Getting back to it. All right. Let's see. Fight the system or exit. Seems like an interesting topic.
What do you think the liturgical calendar of modern man is? It's kind of a funny question. What's a liturgical calendar, for those who don't know, right? So in the Orthodox Church has a liturgical calendar. Every day, every week, every month, every year, there's a...
Give me a second. Hey, Paige. Paige. Can you come here?
What? Where are you?
I'm right here, right above your head.
Oh, what's up?
The one. Yeah. You know what I like? For the ice cream. Yeah, you're right. You know what I like? Right?
No,
Cool, thanks.
I'm not doing it. I'm not gonna do it. I'm just not. I'm not doing it. I can make you like
No, marshmallows are disgusting. And okay, I'll just get myself some ice cream since you're being strong.
let's go back to bed.
I'm just doing what you did, that's all.
That's not true at all.
Uh-huh.
a cycle. There's a cycle of things we celebrate, feasts and fasts, for example, but it even happens every day. Every day there are prayers that monks do at certain times of the day, the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour, matins and vespers, all this kind of stuff. Certain prayers that correspond to the certain needs of certain times of the day. Also certain events that happened in the crucifixion of Christ. This is what happened to him at the 3rd hour, or the 6th hour, and we'll have
a second.
Prayers about those. That's what happens at a daily basis. On a weekly basis, obviously, not just Orthodox Christians, but even Protestants, right? They celebrate Sunday as a day of the resurrection. That's why we go to church on Sunday. Wednesday and Friday, they're days of fasts. Why are they days of fasting? Because on the week of his betrayal, well, Wednesday is the day Christ was betrayed by Judas, and Friday is the day of his crucifixion. So we honor that in fasting on those days. That's something that happens every week. And there are other days of the week that have certain prayer. For example, Monday, I believe, or it might be Tuesday, but I believe it's Monday, is a day for commemorating the angels and the bodiless hosts, things like this. So there's a weekly cycle. And of course, there's a yearly cycle. There are saints' days nearly every day. Well, actually, every day. There's some kind of saint, maybe very minor. And there are there's, of course, Easter, the fast or the Feast of Feasts. There's Christmas. There's the Dormition of the Mother of God. There's the Apostles' Feast. All of those are preceded by fasts to get you ready for these events. And so if you're living in an Orthodox Christian society, obviously every year, any part of the cycle, there is a mood to how things are. In Lent, it might be a little somber, you know. There might be more repentance. There might be more, I don't know, a little, not necessarily sadness, but there's anticipation for something exciting to come. And this is the mood of the society, and everyone is on the same page. Everyone knows, for example, you don't want to be too, extreme, exorbitant, I don't know.
Yeah, because with no tradition, then you have none of that. Think about it. The nostalgia that people want is from a family tradition of some sort. Think about the holidays. And as you get older, unfortunately, a lot of families break apart. You get less of those family traditions. And we as a society have very few traditions that are, compatible for most people or have the same kind of appreciation. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting thinking about like the generational gaps, all this stuff too, that plays into it. The Orthodox Church does a very good job at making tradition.
Maybe too, I don't know why words are lacking me, too excited in Lent, too indulgent in Lent. Obviously, you don't want to do that, Either way, what is modern man's liturgical calendar? I've explained what a liturgical calendar is. And I've come to believe that, obviously people in America, they have holidays, right? Barely any. They have like 2 or 3 holidays. The Calvinists got rid of most of the liturgical calendar. That's why America doesn't have these things. We basically have Christmas, even though it's really about presents now. And we basically have Thanksgiving. For those who don't know, who aren't American, Thanksgiving is a very important holiday for Americans. It's where they celebrate them being allowed to be off work for 2 days in a row in a week. That's amazing. That's unheard of in America.
We do work a lot. We work a lot.
Sometimes even 3. If you in certain jobs you have 3 days off. It's very rare in America. That's what Thanksgiving's all about. And then Halloween, of course, it's the day you dress your little boys up as serial killers, and you dress your little girls up like strippers, and then they ask for candy. That's basically the state, unfortunately, of Halloween nowadays. Now, but that's not the liturgical.
Yeah, Halloween was never really that. It was like celebrating the dead saints.
But that's not the same thing. These are just days that happen. They're not actually that important to American society, but also the West in general. What really...
And I also think that there may be this big misconception with the idea of, Christianity being the underpinning for most of our cultural and societal beliefs. Therefore, Satanism is the inversion or Luciferianism. And when we see the kind of mockery, of Halloween, we automatically assume it's just because it's Christian, which that's part of the case. But I think that it doesn't really matter what religion it is. The religion can be inverted of itself and then made to be out the bad thing. So it could also just be a tool. Like maybe they do believe in these, fucking spiritual beings, but they don't necessarily believe in them the way that we do or have the same understanding or beliefs like the major religions. I don't know. And then you can make the argument if you're Christian that means that they're demonic and satanic because they're not worshiping the true God. Fair. I tend to align with that. But I guess then you would have to say that all of them would be an inversion of that in some way if they're, mocking the one true God. But anyway, just the idea of the inversion doesn't necessarily have to mean like they're going for a specific brand of religion. It could just solely be for the undermining of the cultural cohesion to do inversions.
Really is the liturgical calendar. And here's what I think. When I think about what is the thing that got me excited when I was a kid with anticipation for things to happen in the future, I have to say, when I was 7 years old, it would have to be the products I looked forward to consuming. And what I mean by that is I would have been so excited if you told me, and of course people did tell me, there's going to be a Star Wars Episode 1. It's coming out. It's going to be great. It's going to be everything you've always thought about. Like what's going to happen in Star Wars? Now you're going to know it's going to come out. Remember whichever date that's coming out. That's going to be the big day. And all of society, it's not specifically about Star Wars, but it's about these kind of consumeristic events. All of society, they don't have a liturgical calendar in the way that the church does, but they get excited for these kind of events. That is the anticipation. You're counting down the days into the release of the next movie you want to see in a long series sequel.
Yeah, it's just consumerism. That's right. So our liturgical dish is the title of his video.
It's definitely not going to be the same.
Black Friday, right? Thanksgiving and then Black Friday. New Year's Eve is mostly celebrated to party and consume a bunch of substances that are going to make you act less like yourself and become more delusional and disconnected from reality.
It's going to be totally different. It's going to be way better. That's the thing you're looking forward to. And you're going to be disappointed. Maybe sometimes you won't be. You were disappointed with Star Wars Episode 1 and then 2 and 3 and all the other ones. But, that is the thing that people look forward to as a community, not just as individuals. That's important to remember. It's not just one person is sitting up for this. It's that you go out in public, right? You go out in public, and instead of seeing people decorating for Lent, preparing for Easter, decorating for Christmas, something like that, throughout a whole season, you see ads all over the place for the next product. Maybe it's the next iPhone,
Yeah. How can you have tradition in an ever-evolving culture, in an ever-evolving technological landscape? How can you have a solid tradition? What is tradition?
And that I really think it's not as organized, but I think that unfortunately is how most people are now oriented. That's how I was oriented as a child. It's been a long time. I mean, looking back at it, it's now very clear. That's stuff I was excited about. I wasn't excited. I mean, sure, I was excited to get stuff on Christmas, but not really for Christmas itself. There is a feel. There's a Germanic feel to Christmas. Something nice about it. Even Christmas in America to this day, I think still has it. A little bit of it. There's something, I don't know, something wintry about it. Something cute, but that's not really what people are looking forward to then. Unfortunately, it's just getting stuff. And the consumerist culture we live in, that's all what it's about, So we have these things because we don't have what we should have. We don't actually have a real liturgical calendar. We don't have people looking forward to an excitement, and not just on a yearly basis. Again, remember, there are certain times of day. There are certain days of the week.
And this may seem a little random, but I think that there is this disconnect between the tech elite creating a lot of the AIs and use cases because they live in the West Coast. And yes, they live in San Francisco and California mostly, right? And so that in and of itself is, in a way, an echo chamber. I've never been there, but from what you hear, it's an echo chamber. So I'm not going off of my personal experience. I'll just be open and say it could be otherwise, but based off of the self-emitted and all the data I can find, it supports it's kind of like an echo chamber. And so the issue then becomes your traditions, that like echo chambers, traditions, their beliefs, their culture, ideology, philosophy, even spirituality imbue their products, right? Because you like a home cooked meal because it's home cooked. Whoever made that has a special seasoning, special way they cook it, special something that makes it unique. And also just the amount of love, I do think I don't know how to prove this, but can change the way food tastes. Anyway, so you kind of apply that similar thing to people who take pride in making great products. And also if they believe that they're doing something right for humanity, they could, have jet fuel and have some sort of, God complex, Messiah complex. Not saying they all do. Not even trying to imply that it's a widespread thing. It's just that could be a reason why, wanting to get very rich. Well, either way, any of those reasons, it's going to have a lot of overlap with where you live, like your traditions, your values, all of those things. So with that, there's a big disconnect with the West Coast and the East Coast on both, tradition, culture, all those same things. And even on a smaller scale, there's a bigger disconnect with small cities like where we live in Ohio. Meaning we're way more in the past technologically than a lot of other places. And the way people interact with each other here is quite different than they do in the West Coast. You know, we lived in Arizona for a while, and the people out there were remarkably different than the people in the Midwest. Not saying that one culture was better than the other, but more so saying that there was a distinct difference that had a lot of pros and cons. And one of them is, well, not even going into those differences, but I will say that the climate also plays a huge role in how all of these things develop. There's this idea of continual abundance from the tech world. When they probably live in San Francisco, they probably live somewhere beautiful where it's nice most of the year. You can get fruit anytime you want. You can get food anytime you want. You can farm pretty much all year. It then gives this, and obviously I'm not saying that they're this short-sighted that they don't understand the seasons and how that affects agriculture and growing seasons and actually kills a lot of things. What I'm getting at is the bigger idea. The season of winter can go beyond the physical season. It can go into like a metaphysical space. Like Tony Robbins says this, Elliot Holt says this. Go through seasons in life. There's the summer, the spring, the fall, the winter. There's 4 different stages. There's pattern that we kind of repeat. Anyway, accept it or not, doesn't matter. The words are just filler for a true concept, which is we go through seasons of life. We have phases of life. We learn from certain things, whatever. With that, life in and of itself, kind of has this winter phase, which then means that you don't really have necessarily abundance all the time. But I do believe that that's a big disconnect, and it trickles out into multiple other communities. So anyway,
that we have totally lost the spiritual importance of them. And now instead, our new liturgical calendar in America, I mean, listen, this is not automatic. It doesn't always happen like this, but obviously in America and most other Western countries, you work Monday through Friday. You get Sunday and Saturday off. Okay. Why? I mean, that's an accident of history. We think of it as just how things have always worked, where it's not. In the Roman Empire, that's not necessarily how things worked. In other societies, it isn't either. Obviously, a lot of modern societies have acclimated to the way that Westerners have of doing things, the kind of calendar we have. But the world itself, we all want to be on the same page. We all want to look forward to things in anticipation. In our spiritual vacuity.
And we keep doing that because of the illusion of improvements. Not every advancement or quote unquote progression in whatever technology industry or whatever is an improvement. Think about software updates. How many times have you done a software update and the update has really been a downgrade as opposed to an upgrade, right? So just because it's new doesn't mean it has any real improvement. But we get caught up in that. And because you can measure it, there's this whole belief on metrics. You have to be able to measure all these things, that way you can improve it. They say, oh, you can't improve what you can't measure. Like, how do you measure love? How do you get better at loving your significant other? Like, those things are, you can't measure them, right? It's kind of hard to do that. You can maybe break it down into like little actions that you do, but there's something beyond the actions as well, right? So you can train people about the actions to get better of the metric that you're doing, whatever, but there's another layer there. Anyway, with metrics, we get captivated because we see this, okay, if we just do this with a number and do that with a number, we can improve it to do this. Maybe that's true, and obviously that is true for a lot of things, but could it not be a point that you're just over-optimizing? There's no need to optimize. There's no need to improve, and now you're just doing it for the sake of optimization and the sake of improvement. That's a lot of what our culture has been developed around, our liturgical calendar, as he calls it here. So it's very good.
Our lack of, a true liturgical calendar, we substitute that, or we substitute something else for that, something that's a pale representation that's not really going to have people excited for the future. I mean, it'll have people excited for the future. It'll always have you excited for the future, and you'll always be disappointed. And, unfortunately, that's how it is. It puts your faith, it puts your consciousness, your nous in something that is just going to be disappointed, because ultimately it is not some collective or spiritual or traditional thing. It's something that's ephemeral. It's something made by a corporate boardroom. That's not the new release of an iPhone, where the iPhone is finally undoing some error they did a while ago, or the new release of some video game, or the new release of yada yada yada. Who cares?
What is that?
I don't know. It's from outside. I don't know what that was.
I hear cats fighting a lot at night. It's vicious.
Yeah. They don't mess around.
They don't. Then sometimes you just hear them go.
Yeah, they really get going.
Going at it, however they do it.
This now defines our entire society. I remember what it's like, and sometimes I do get sucked in to some event like this. I mean, people get sucked into even elections. Not to say they're not totally devoid of meaning, but there's a spiritual trap there, where you're getting you're often being engaged in something you don't have control over. It's not actually for your spiritual benefit, but for your spiritual deficit. And that's what consumerism is. It's a new religion. It's a new liturgical calendar that has you celebrating the next product coming out. And when you put it that way, there are a lot of people who denigrate religion, and at the same time, they're a member of the most pathetic religion ever, the religion of modernity, the religion of consumerism. They say that they might even say they hate capitalism, but that's their religion. That's what they live and breathe. That's what they look forward to. That's all of their life. That and that I will say, I hope you don't look at things that way. And the good news is, if you look at things that way, you're wrong. And you should be excited that you're wrong.
Because you can correct
that is not the liturgical calendar you should be following. You should really be following the liturgical calendar of the Orthodox Church. I mean, that's where it is, but that's not really the point I have of this video. It's really just that our new religion is dangerous. The new religion of modernity. And make no mistake, it is a religion. That's what it is. Because religion, ultimately, people say, obviously the Latin word is a binding. That's what the word originally means. It binds a society together. It has them celebrating together, mourning together. When they're told to mourn, they mourn. When they're told to celebrate, they celebrate. When they're told to look forward to the next product to consume, they look forward to the next product to consume. And that is a religion. And they're much more organized. They're much more religious than, unfortunately, most Orthodox Christians. We're not quite as religious as they are sometimes. But in fact, unfortunately, we get caught up in those things too. So, I know I have. I lived my life like that for a long time, and it's still a temptation. But that's something for you to think about. Just think about every day, every week, every month. What really are you looking forward to? What really are the events that define, your life? What are you waiting for? Are you just waiting for something to happen? Are you just waiting for some kind of event, some kind of new product? Because that isn't quite how it should be. Let's just say that.
I think this is business. LindyPress.net.
In fact, it's almost like the disease of
Okay. Let's see here.
That are grown adults, and this is for years ago. I said, the more you learn, the more you earn. That was Warren Buffett's simple quote from a book Warren Buffett wrote to first graders.
It's like the billionaire Warren Buffett says, the more you learn, the more you earn.
When I read it, I was like, man, most humans don't even know this that are grown adults. And this is for 6-year-olds. First thing to teach your kids and teach yourself. The more you, in the modern world, we live in an information, knowledge-based world. So we live in the knowledge society. So the more you learn, the more you earn, as long as you apply it.
I like that.
Some people
Knowledge
just learn and learn. You're not learning to get degrees. You're not learning to get certificates. You're learning to get results. So as long as you put your learning in action, you are going to make money. Is AI going to change that? No, it's going to be even more, because people who have more knowledge will utilize AI in new, more powerful ways. So there's always room at the top. In any technological change like AI, the people who are low performers get hurt the most, and mid performers get hurt a lot. But the high performers thrive. It's just like during the Depression in 1929, almost 100 years ago, there was the Great Depression. My grandma lived through it. She lived through 2 depressions. She lived through the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. Then she came to America in 1939. There was still a depression going on.
It is true that the top performers typically remain the top performers and they win disproportionately. That is how you have these massive winners in these depressions, economic depressions. It's because they are high performers in any condition and they execute when the timing is right for them to execute, and they have the skill set, the mindset, the personality to fulfill all of that and accomplish their goal. It doesn't mean that you'll be successful 100% of the time, but you have to take the chance to be successful. And that's what's going on right now in AI.
On in 1939. So she lived through 2 depressions. But if you look, there were some people who made more money than ever during the Depression. There were some people who made more money than ever, you know? And the reason was because the way technological change always allows the people at the top to be more creative. So for example, AI is now going to allow the people who know what they're doing to spend less time on bullshit. Already I've got my AI CEO app, which cuts me checking my Slacks, which might take an hour a day. It scans all 100 and 200 Slack channels and gives me a summary every hour. So I can take a 1-hour task and it'll take me 1 minute. And it's actually better. It doesn't make mistakes. It catches things I wouldn't catch. So that's the knowledge-based economy is not going anywhere. There will be the people who know what to do already. If you know how to prompt better than other people, like I prompt better than anybody I've ever met. I haven't really met anybody. I'm sure there are people better than me, but I've never met somebody. I prompt with 25-minute voice memos to ChatGPT. That's an example of me taking advantage of the same technology anybody could take, but people don't. Also, if you're an action taker, they call that agency. If you're a high agency human versus a low agency person procrastinates, has paralysis by overanalysis. A high agency person thinks a little bit and then they act and then they think again and then they act. And so if
I'm high agency. I don't think at all, and I do. I'm just kidding. I think a lot.
you're high agency, ChatGPT and all the AIs is just making you able to have 10 times the impact per day. You know, I used to have, just like I said, spend an hour reading my Slacks. Things like email will go away slowly but surely because,
dude, I hate email. Paige, do you hate email? It's like one of the most inconvenient forms of messaging in the modern day. I prefer text message. And if you want to be somewhat like an email, I think the alternatives now are Telegram, WhatsApp, other off text platforms that are much easier to just get into. And just, I know you can download the apps on your phone, all that shit.
Mine prefers text.
But then you got a subject line. You got to put a fucking different address in every time. It's just kind of tedious. And maybe I'm doing some things wrong. Maybe my email game's weak, but I don't care to really improve it because I don't see it being around much longer, especially now that you can personalize all your emails and automate it. You don't have to touch it. And it's a little bit harder to do that with text. You can still do it, but there's a little more legal scrutiny.
you know, even building sales funnels. My friend has a new CRM. Like, you don't have to set up campaigns. You just tell the AI, like, hey, I launched a new campaign for my coaching offer. Like, turn that into sales for me. And it's just going to automate with, it's called agentic AI agents. So agentic AI is really only about 4 months old. So don't think you're too late. It's early. It's the really powerful agentic stuff is really since December to now. Okay. There's a lot of, they've been talk about AI agents, but they still make a lot of mistakes. They still do. If you look at lovable.dev or Bolt, that'll build a website for. Which means that there's opportunities for people to help iterate them and make them better if that's what you want to pursue. Yeah. And especially in your career field, like that gives you a whole nother suite of tools you can use to learn more and therefore earn more. For you. they still have a good bit of bugs. It's not even done yet. So agentic, like,
But I will say that that's not necessarily true. Like, it's not, you can learn about, I don't know, actually. I mean, if you learn a lot about paper, you can go and be in the paper manufacturing business, I suppose, or how paper is made. So I guess it's depending on how you use that knowledge is really what's key.
an agent with an IC at the end, like a CIA agent, FBI agent with an IC. That's called agentic AI. It's not genetic AI, somebody wrote. So I do not think, now, as I've said, knowing how to build social media brands will also protect you from AI displacing you. Because if you can build social media brands,
And that's why I'm going so hard on my personal brand these days, is because if nothing else, I know just monetizing and being able to build my brand community, it will help tremendously as we go into this new age, because the creator economy is going to flourish beyond belief. Just think about what's going to happen in the AI space with creatives, what they're going to be able to do. So the possibilities are tremendous. And I mean, Ty Lopez is a big proponent. He's a guy that's saying only two things that are going to really, really, really set you apart in the future and that are really going to survive as time goes on are personal brands and AI for business, which I tend to agree with, because if you just end up managing a team of AIs to do business for you, it's probably going to be good if you're still the face of that business and you can monetize it and tell people. I mean, not necessarily like have to tell people, because AI could do that, but just having a brand around that, I think, would be good. And then just a brand in general, because then companies would want to sponsor you, or you get speaking engagements. In-person communities are still going to be huge too, right? So there's going to be a rise of virtual influencers that I think people should utilize. However, at the same time, you can't replace, I don't think, the human connection. I don't think you're ever going to be able to truly replace it. You can dilute it. You can convolute it. You can try and manipulate it, but raw human connection is always going to win.
brands, personal ones, even with your face or somebody else's face on them. That's the one thing AI is going to try to replace. There's already AI Instagrams, AI OnlyFans. But for example, a DJ who has a social media brand but also performs in Las Vegas, he's not going to get replaced yet. But now eventually there'll be robots. But in 20 years, there'll be a different game. But remember, you don't have to live by fear. I've watched many cycles go. And as long as you are committed to staying on the cutting edge, you're always fine. That's what I'm trying to say. You adapt, and most people don't, so they die. So you don't have to worry that much. People have too much fear of AI. For the most part, look at AI as improving life. For example, medical doctors, it's already about 10 times better at diagnosing things. So the world, AI will probably, especially with quantum computers, will probably get rid of cancer. Who here has had somebody they love die from cancer? Why are you going to be afraid of that? Don't be afraid of that. That'd be great. Imagine if my friend Zach died of.
Sorry. That's funny. Just the timing, the way he said it. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear it.
Life, for example, have too much fear of AI. For the most part, look at AI as improving life. For example, medical doctors, it's already about 10 times better at diagnosing things. So the world, AI will probably, especially with quantum computers, will probably get rid of cancer. Who here has had somebody they love die from cancer? Why are you going to be afraid of that? Don't be afraid of that. That'd be great. Imagine.
That's not the point he's trying to make.
Yeah. My friend Zach died of leukemia. She could have lived 5 more years, 10 more years. He'd still be alive. No doubt. They're cracking the code on the human genome. You just need really quantum AI along with quantum computers that can do more powerful computations. But cancer is a solvable. Almost every disease is somewhat solvable, or can at least be counteracted. So just look at Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson in the early 90s got HIV. He's still alive. He became a billionaire. He got kids. He owned the LA Dodgers. He's happier. You just see that guy. He's gaining weight. That's from the new technological changes. So when people are afraid of technology, it's the wrong.
Or maybe he just didn't take AZT.
reaction. Now, I will say that technology always has opposite effects. For example, technology to have airplanes, right? So you get an airplane, modern airplanes, let's say 60, 70 years ago, people started being able to fly easily. And you would think that would connect people more, but it actually had the opposite effect. Now, people's grandma
People move
lives
away.
1,000 miles away because people just say in the back of their head, well, now I can fly. So technology that's supposed to make us closer sometimes does the opposite. Social media in the name was supposed to make us more social, but the social media technology actually made people less social and more isolated. So the only thing you need to fear with technology is the old saying, for every effect, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? When you shoot a bullet, you get the gun pushes backwards to counteract. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So it's not so much that you should fear the gun kicking back. Just make sure you don't put your face in front of it. So for those of you who you don't fear AI, you just understand it's going to have some repercussions. It's going to eliminate certain industries completely. Customer support is going to be eliminated first. You know.
Yeah, because customer support agents, they just read a script. They're very generic. They don't have a lot of personality. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you get a good one, but those are the exceptions. Most of the time, people in customer service do not like doing customer service. So if you could replace it with AI, that'd be great. And you know what? If you are in customer service, maybe a smooth transition would be into something like sales. I think that would be a hard thing to replace over time because that involves personality. That goes into like the whole personal brand category. Because I don't think people buy from people they like. I think they buy from people they trust and like. And it's going to be really hard for people to fully trust and like an AI salesperson. So with really high ticket things, you're going to need salespeople. Maybe not for real cheap things, because you already don't need that. Ty Lopez, I think, is a good example of it. He just created digital marketing funnels and made hundreds of millions with effectively no sales team.
Lawyers, 80% of lawyers will be eliminated. Accountant, if you're a CPA, you could, if you decided not to learn any more skills, right, you could be replaced and find yourself without a job. Already, Google, without a doubt, is not hiring as many people. Meta is not hiring. Shopify already names their AI agents with names like employees. They're already not having to hire. One of the big incubators, accelerators, you know, in San Francisco says already 90% of the code for all of their different new software companies they're investing in, the venture capitalists, 90% of the code is written by AI agents. And so now, if you're a computer programmer and you don't want to learn anything, and you're not willing to evolve and adapt, and you will, it's like the gun kicking. It's going to kick you in the face when it recoil. So, but in general, if you're committed, that's what I said. I started this talk by saying the more you learn, if you're committed to learning, if you're like Charlie Munger says, every day go to bed a little bit wiser than you were before, that even if you grow by 1% a week, okay, you get 1% smarter per week. And remember, the smarting in the past, smart with who can memorize stuff. That's not as important anymore. You don't need to know as much. You know, that Civil War was 1861 to 1865. That recall will be done by AI. But to be wise and make wise decisions, that still takes human discipline. So discipline is something AI won't help. In fact, it'll have the opposite effect. All right. So people are going to get lazier. That's why I said, once you know the opposite reaction, okay, AI is going to make people lazier.
Why aren't you watching?
You can move into that opportunity. Okay, where are people going to be lazy? Everywhere. So if I'm not lazy, I have an unfair advantage. 100 years ago, everybody worked hard, man. There was a time in America where 90% of people grew up on farms. Imagine where everybody was a hard worker. Then it was hard to find an unfair advantage. Now, if you have like remotely self-discipline to not procrastinate, you're on the 1% of America. Like, it's just like America's getting fatter and fatter and fatter. America's getting lazier and lazier and lazier, right? We don't have starvation anymore. 200 years ago, people starved to death. Now we have the technology to grow crazy amount of carbohydrates and food and process it. And so the opposite and equal reaction is we went from dying from starvation to dying of diabetes or heart attack. So, but if you're a learning machine, as that change happened, it wouldn't affect you. because you'd go, okay, there's going to be more food than ever. I got to focus on discipline. You never had the calorie count 200 years ago. Everybody was always underweight. There wasn't enough food in the world. People forget that. In China, 50s or 60s, they had like 100 million people starved to death in China. India had big starvation events like that. I forget the year. But the point being that right now, most of you live in the Western world. You have no real negative things. There's nothing left. You have a very low chance of being murdered today. You know, like I think murder rates are down to like 1/10 of the 1500s. Women.
Yeah, I mean, Steven Pinker had made this point a long time ago in a book called like The Better Angels of Our Demons, or The Angels of Our Better Angels, something like that. I don't know. And it was about how violence in humanity has been going down historically for a very, very long time, especially with the advancements of technology and society. Like, I mean, if you want to call everything in society an advancement, but the transition away from more natural living has reduced violent crimes, which is interesting.
You have a very low chance of dying in childbirth. 100 years ago, you're talking 1 out of 3 women die in childbirth. You know, now you get a toothache, they put you under anesthesia. It wasn't even 100 years ago that, I mean, you would get drilled your tooth with nothing to blunt the pain, maybe some alcohol. Okay. So that's it. What each of you need to realize is there's nothing wrong anymore, really, except it's in your own invention of your own mind and how you focus. So if you focus on the negative news and what's going on in Botswana and what's going on in Palestine and what's going on, you can be led down a dark path and thinking that everything's bad. But right now, everything's good. All you got to have is a commitment to being a learning and adapting machine. You're not willing to stop learning no matter what, and have high agency discipline. And then everything works out. Not only better, and then you got to stick to it for a while. Some people always say you're going to get everything you want in life. It's just going to take 2 years longer than you planned. Remember that. You will get what you want out of life, but it will take 2 years longer than you planned. Yeah, that's fine. And that's hard for a lot of people, because a lot of people, they don't have agency. High agency people, they're disciplined, they're patient, they're willing to wait 2 years longer, you know. And people with low agency, low self-control, low self-discipline, there's no way they'll be able to do that. And AI is going to make that work, because people are going to be more impatient. But that's an opportunity for those of you who say, man, I'll wait. I'm going to accomplish this. I'm going to have 3 streams of income, 3 different businesses. You know, I'm 3 streams of income, whether it takes me 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. I don't care. I'm high agency. I'm not a victim. I understand that Ty already told me I'll get what I want, but it'll probably take 2 years longer than my plan. See, that's all. As I said, almost everything's an illusion of the mind now. It used to not be. People used to have genuine hardship. When my grandma was a little girl, 1 out of 3 people in the world had somebody killed in their family. 1 out of 3. You had, in a world of like maybe 1 billion people, you had over 250 million people killed, wounded, or displaced forcibly. That's 1 out of 4. You don't even know one friend that was killed in a world war. So that's what I said. Right now, we're dealing with the game of illusions, because the human brain wants to always be in high alert mode that something's wrong. That's what high anxiety is the #1 diagnosed mental issue right now. But there's nothing actually to be anxious of. But people have. One of my friends married a woman. I don't know why. I would not have chosen her. But he once asked her, you know, do you feel anxiety right now? And she said, yes. And he said, well, what's wrong? She said, you know what? Nothing is wrong, which makes me feel like that means something must go wrong soon. So now I'm just waiting for something to go wrong. And I was thinking, that is a primitive state of humans that exists because long ago, something went wrong every day. Long ago, something went wrong every day. And so that's why I say you have to have a lot of mind control. You have to be able to hypnotize yourself out of your primitive, anxious state. You have to see statistics and numbers. Humans are very bad with statistics. Most people literally think murder rates are higher now. I mean, it's absurd. Yeah. I mean, in some places, murder rates are down 100x. Now, for every 100 murders there's 1. You know, women are thinking so many women are being murdered by serial killers in parking lots. It's so rare when it happens.
Dude, it's mostly very, very safe everywhere.
It makes it the front page of the news. It's just an illusion. The odds of a woman being killed by a stranger is like 99 out of 100 murders of women is by like their ex-husband or ex-boyfriend. So most of women's fears about strangers is totally an illusion. But a high agency woman who has high discipline and understands math, statistics, and reality she eliminates that fear from her life. She might keep the fear. Women, as I said, should be very afraid of ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends. That's about most of the killing of women. Men are very afraid of stuff too. You know, men, for example, are afraid of losing their hair. That's a big thing. Never realized that because I haven't lost my hair. Like, men think about their hair loss. Like, be honest, who here is a man? You're seeing your hair thinning and you think about it 2 to 4 times a day. Like, be honest. I need some honesty here. I mean, just imagine thinking about that multiple times. I could understand thinking about it once a month. It's unimportant. You got Jason Statham married to Victoria's Secret model, bald. You got Michael Jordan, basketball player,
Bald.
But I'm saying men
Bald.
don't
Bald.
understand statistics.
Mr.
In
Clean,
general,
bald.
your life will have zero negative effect if you lose your hair. It really won't. It's just like there's not men who go, you know what, life was great. Then I started to lose my hair and everything went to shit. It just doesn't. That's why I said women have.
It's so funny to think about. Just some dude like, oh my gosh, my life fell apart. I'm bald now. They're super successful or have a good life, but they failed.
Have illusions of
Which is kind of like probably a genetic failure, but that's not here or there.
mind that keep them from success because they're preoccupied with nonsense. So men are preoccupied with their own nonsense. You know, when my hair is falling out or something. So there are some physical things you should be scared of.
That's funny too, the dichotomy. Women, ex-husbands and ex-boyfriends, probably the most likely ones to kill you. Men have reasonable fears too. Fear of losing their hair.
Heard of, but it's just not that, and it's not that common anymore. We mostly have mostly of the dangers now is excess of good things. So not only is there not
Don't get a divorce.
much wrong in the world,
Marry and don't get a divorce. I mean, for the most part, yeah.
but your only danger is too much of a good thing, too much carbohydrates. Used to be people starved; they didn't have enough carbohydrates, not enough protein. I saw an article today on how humans are eating too much protein. So almost all your problems now and too much leisure. It used to be people were overworked. Egyptian slaves built fucking pyramids by hand. They worked till they died at 30. Now, the main problem is nobody pulls rocks at all in life anymore. In fact, we built buildings called gyms because we were dying or not feeling good because we have too much of a good thing. That's an interesting problem to have, you know? So you got to, whenever you start to get anxious, you say, wait a sec, am I anxious because I got too many good things going on in my life? You know, now I remember when I started making money online, there was no YouTube videos to watch. YouTube didn't come till 5 years later. There was the first course I bought came in a 3-ring binder. It came in a 3-ring fucking binder. There was no video. I had to learn it. I remember I bought Trump University in like 2005. It was a great course, by the way. Trump University was
That's interesting. Everybody seems to dog on Trump University.
really good. And I remember they did like a live call. It was a fucking call. You know why it was a call? There was no Zoom. There was no video conference essentially available in the world. It's so much nicer. You all get to learn by looking. I'm back home now. You get to learn by watching, observing. You can see videos. You can learn anything you want. So you need, the takeaway from this part of what I'm saying is that control the mind, because with AI, with modern world, if you can stay cool under pressure, under the pressure of losing your hair, under the pressure of there being too much calories at American restaurants, if you can keep cool, keep logical, nothing, the odds of you succeeding are 100x your grandparents, not 10x, 100x you women, but men too. And especially men who live outside the United States. In the past, if you didn't live in America, you're pretty doomed. If you lived in, you know, Vietnam in 1940, the odds of you making money was almost nothing. If you lived in Paraguay in 1990, you couldn't connect to the internet and just sell into America. You had to sell to fucking Paraguay. So you have to Gratitude unlocks the door to potential. So if you feel like you're not making enough money, you got to say to yourself, I'm grateful that I live now because it's going to be pretty easy, but not instant, to fix this. It might take 2 years longer than I thought for me to have multiple streams of income, but now it's real. If I had been born in Paraguay in 1980, I'm pretty much stuck. I'm a destiny of where I'm born, and the odds of being able to get past that are so low. You are going against a 1 in 1,000 odds. It's not a 1 in 1,000 odds that you learn how to become financially independent now. I have people that listen to me are like 70% of people figure out breakthroughs financially. So good. I'm going to let you all go. We'll end at a 9.
All right.
Meta prompting is turning out to be a very, very powerful tool that everyone's
Dude,
using now. It kind of actually feels like
night. That's so crazy. Literally, this episode came out last night. Didn't watch it. I just stumbled across it coming up with my idea that turned into a post on Substack.
coding in 1995. Like, the tools are not all the way there. We're in this new frontier. But personally, it also kind of feels like learning how to manage a person, where it's like, how do I actually communicate the things that they need to know in order to make a good decision. Welcome back to another episode of The Light Cone. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what is actually happening inside the best AI startups when it comes to prompt engineering. We surveyed more than a dozen companies and got their take right from the frontier of building this stuff, the practical tips. Jared, why don't we start with an example from one of your best AI startups?
I managed to get an example from a company called ParaHelp. ParaHelp does AI customer support. There are a bunch of companies who are doing this, but ParaHelp is doing it really, really well. They're actually powering the customer support for Perplexity and Replit and Bolt and a bunch of other top AI companies now. So if you go and you email a customer support ticket into Perplexity, what's actually responding is their AI agent. The cool thing is that the ParaHelp guys very graciously agreed to show us the actual prompt that is powering this agent, and to put it on screen on YouTube for the entire world to see. It's relatively hard to get these prompts for vertical AI agents because they're kind of like the crown jewels of the IP of these companies. And so very grateful to the ParaHelp guys for agreeing to basically open source this prompt.
Diana, can you walk us through this very detailed prompt? It's super interesting, and it's very rare to get a chance to see this in action.
So the interesting thing about this prompt is actually it's really long. It's very detailed. In this document, you can...
There's another one I found the other day. It's called the master prompt from this other entrepreneur guy that's in the startup space. They gave it out for free, which I thought was cool. I have it. If you want it, let me know.
See, is 6 pages long, just scrolling through it.
I'll charge you.
The big thing that a lot of the best prompts start with is this concept of setting up the role of the LLM. You're a manager of a customer service agent, and it breaks it down into bullet points, what it needs to do. Then the big thing is telling the task, which is to approve or reject a tool call, because it's orchestrating agent calls from all these other ones. And then it gives it a bit of the high level plan. It breaks it down step by step. You see steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Dude, you could literally copy paste this if you know how to create workflows for customer service agents, and then just start selling the shit out of it to small businesses.
And then it gives some of the important things to keep in mind, that it should not kind of go weird into calling different kinds of tools. It tells them how to structure the output, because a lot of things with agents is you need them to integrate with other agents. So it's almost like gluing the API call. So it's important to specify that it's going to give certain output of accepting or rejecting, and in this format. And this is sort of the high level section. And one thing that the best prompts do, they break it down sort of in this markdown type of style formatting. So you have sort of the heading here. And then later on, it goes into more details on how to do the planning. And you see this is a sub-bullet part of it. And as part of the plan, there's actually 3 big sections. There's how to plan, and then how to create each of the steps in the plan. And then the high level example of the plan. One big thing about the best planning here,
Write this stuff
and then
down. So there's a heading, so I can have the structure.
and later on, it goes into more details on how to do the planning. And you see this is like a sub bullet part of it. And as part of the plan, there's actually 3 big sections. And there's how to plan, and then how to create each of the steps in the plan. And then the high level example of the plan. One big thing about the best prompts is they outline how to reason about the task. And then a big thing is giving it an example. And this is what it does. And one thing that's interesting about this, it looks more like programming than writing English, because it has.
That's why I've also been saying the people who are killing it in prompt engineering are those who have a coding background. Literally made that argument the other day.
This XML tag kind of format to specify sort of the plan. We found that it makes it a lot easier for LLMs to follow, because a lot of LLMs were post-trained in RLHF with kind of.
Hang on, that was pretty.
Writing English. And one thing that's interesting about this, it looks more like programming than writing English, because it has this XML tag kind of format to specify sort of the plan. We found that it makes it a lot easier for LLMs to follow, because a lot of LLMs were post-trained in RLHF with kind of XML type of input, and it turns out to produce better results.
Yeah, one thing I'm surprised that isn't in here, or maybe this is just the version that they released, what I almost expect is there to be a section where it describes a particular scenario and actually gives example output for that scenario.
That's in like the next stage of the pipeline. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because it's customer specific, right? Because like every customer has their own like flavor of how to respond to these support tickets. And so their challenge, like a lot of these agent companies, is like, how do you build a general purpose product when every customer like wants, has like slightly different workflows and like preferences? That's a really interesting thing that I see the vertical AI agent companies talking about a lot, which is like, how do you have enough flexibility to make special purpose logic without turning into a consulting company where you're building like a new prompt for every customer? And I actually think this like concept of like forking and merging prompts across customers and which part of the prompt is customer specific versus like company wide is like a really interesting thing that the world is only just beginning to explore.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Jared. So this is concept of defining the prompt in the system prompt, then there's the developer prompt, and then there's the user prompt. So what this means is the system prompt is basically almost like defining sort of the high-level API of how your company operates. In this case, the example of ParaHelp is very much a system prompt. There's nothing specific about the customer. And then as they add specific instances of that API and calling it, then they stuff all that into more the developer prompt, which is not shown here. And that adds all the context of, let's say, working with perplexity. There's certain ways of how you handle RAG questions as opposed to working with Bold is very different, right? And then I don't think ParaHelp has a user prompt because their product is not consumed directly by an end user, but an end user prompt could be more like Replit or A0, right? Where users need to type is like, generate me a site that has these buttons, this and that goes all in the user prompt. So that's sort of the architecture that's sort of emerging.
And to your point about avoiding becoming a consulting company, I think there's so many startup opportunities in building the tooling around all of this stuff. Like, for example, like anyone who's done prompt engineering knows that the examples and worked examples are really important to improving the quality of the output. And so then if you take like ParaHelp as an example, they really want good worked examples that are specific to each company. And so you can imagine that as they scale, you almost want that done automatically. Like in your dream world, what you want is just like an agent itself that can pluck out the best examples from like the customer data set.
you see them all as being in their right places and not being able really to make mistakes, although they may think they're making mistakes or not making mistakes and playing all these competitive games. But that's their game. Now, I only say if that game begins to bore you and it begins to trouble you and give you ulcers and all kinds of things, then you raise the problem of getting out of it. And therefore you start to become interested in things like that. That's simply a symptom of your growing in a certain direction. Where you are tired of playing a certain kind of game. You are as naturally flowing in another direction as if a tree were putting out a new branch.
and then software that just like ingests that straight into like wherever it should belong in the pipeline without you having to manually go out and plug that all and ingest it in all of yourself.
That's probably a great segue into meta prompting, which is one of the things we want to talk about, because that's a consistent theme that keeps coming up when we talk to our AI startups.
Yeah, Tropier is one of the startups I'm working with in the current YC batch, and they've really helped people like YC company Ducky do really in-depth helped people like startups I'm working with in the current YC batch, and they've really helped people like YC company Ducky do really in-depth understanding and debugging of the prompts and the return values from a multi-stage workflow. And one of the things they figured out is prompt folding. So, basically one prompt can dynamically generate better versions of itself. So a good example of that is a classifier prompt that generates a specialized prompt based on the previous query. And so you can actually go in, take the existing prompt that you have and actually feed it more examples where maybe the prompt failed or didn't quite do what you wanted. And you can actually, instead of you having to go and rewrite the prompt, you just put it into the raw LLM and say, help me make this prompt better. And because it knows itself so well, strangely, meta prompting is turning out to be a very, very powerful tool that everyone's using now.
And the next step after you do sort of prompt folding, if the task is very complex, there's this concept of using examples. And this is what Jazzberry does. It's one of the companies I'm working with this batch. They basically...
This is just a ton of gravy. I don't really have much to say. I'm just taking notes. Learning.
Build automatic bug finding in code, which is a lot harder. And the way they do it is they feed a bunch of really hard examples that only expert programmers could do. Let's say if you want to find an N+1 query, it's actually hard today for even like the best LLMs to find those. And the way to do those is they find parts of the code, then they add those into the prompt, and meta prompt is like, hey, this is an example of an N+1 type of error. and then that works it out. And I think this pattern of sometimes when it's too hard to even kind of write a prose around it, let's just give you an example that turns out to work really well, because it helps LLMs to reason around complicated tasks and steer it better, because you can't quite kind of put exact parameters. And it's almost like unit testing programming in a sense, like test-driven development is sort of the LLM version of that.
Yeah, another thing that Trope here sort of talks about is, the model really wants to actually help you so much that if you just tell it, give me back output in this particular format, even if it doesn't quite have the information it needs, it'll actually just tell you what it thinks you want to hear. And it's literally a hallucination. So one thing they discovered is that you actually have to give the LLMs a real escape hatch. You need to tell it, if you do not have enough information to say yes or no or make a determination, don't just make it up. Stop and ask me. And that's a very different way to think about it.
That's actually something we learned at some of the internal work that we've done with agents at YC, where Jared came up with a really inventive way to give the LLM a escape hatch. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the Tropier approach is one way to give the LLM an escape hatch. We came up with a different way, which is in the response format, to give it the ability to have part of the response be essentially a complaint to you, the developer, that like you have given it confusing or underspecified information and it doesn't know what to do. And then the nice thing about that is that we just run your LLM like in production with real user data, and then you can go back and you can look at the outputs that it has given you in that like output parameter. We call it debug info internally. So like we have this like debug info parameter where it's basically reporting to us things that we need to fix about it, and it literally ends up being like a to-do list that you, the agent developer, has to do. It's like really kind of mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just even for hobbyists or people who are interested in playing around for this for personal projects, like a very simple way to get started with meta prompting is to follow the same structure of the prompt, is to give it a role and make the role be like, you're an expert prompt engineer who gives really like detailed, great critiques and advice on how to improve prompts, and give it the prompt that you had in mind, and it will spit you back a more expanded, better prompt. And so you can just keep running that loop.
They need to get responses from LLMs in their product a lot quicker. They do the meta prompting with a bigger, beefier model, and you have the, hundreds of billions of parameters plus models like, I guess, Cloud 4, 3.7, or your GPT-03. And they do this meta prompting, and then they have a very good working one that then they use into the distilled model. So they use it on, for example, an F4O, and it ends up working pretty well, specifically sometimes for voice AI agent companies, because latency is very important to get this whole Turing test to pass. Because if you have too much pause before the agent responds, I think humans can detect something is off. So they use a faster model, but with a bigger, better prompt that was refined from the bigger models. So it's like a common pattern as well.
Another, again, less sophisticated maybe, but like as the prompt gets longer and longer, like it becomes a large working doc. One thing I found useful is as you're using it, if you just note down in a Google Doc things that you're seeing, just the output's not being how you want, or not ways that you can think to improve it, you can just write those in note form and then give Gemini Pro like your notes plus the original prompt and ask it to suggest a bunch of edits to the prompt to incorporate these in well, and it does that quite well.
The other trick is in Gemini 2.5 Pro, if you look at the thinking traces as is parsing through evaluation, you could actually learn a lot about all those misses as well. We've done that internal as well, right?
As this is critical, because if you're just using Gemini via the API.
Learning about prompting here. State-of-the-art prompting for AI agents. That is what we're listening to from the Y Combinator YouTube channel. Getting a bunch of game here, taking a bunch of notes. Don't really have much to say on it so far, just that it is very informative, extremely valuable if you like being in the AI space.
Until recently, you did not get the thinking traces, and like the thinking traces are like the critical debugging information to like understand like what's wrong with your prompt. They just added it to the API, so you can now actually like pipe that back into your developer tools and workflows.
And this
Yeah, I
just
think
came
it's
out
an
yesterday.
underrated consequence of Gemini Pro having such long context windows is you can effectively use it like a REPL. Go sort of like one by one, like put your prompt on like one example, then literally watch the reasoning trace in real time to figure.
That's one thing I have liked about Gemini 2.5 is its ability to showcase its thought and its reasoning in order and then provide a bunch of sources. I've been doing a lot of deep research in Gemini 2.5 lately, especially after I discovered in LM Arena, Gemini 2.5 has been number one for almost every category or just whatever Google AI. And I knew at that point I had to accept the fact that I need to branch out from ChatGPT more. Not that I haven't before. Like I've had the DeepSeek app, I've used Claude. Claude works pretty well when it comes to writing, but I like the way Gemini writes a little bit better. Additionally, I like bringing the two together, Gemini and ChatGPT, and using them to refine certain ideas and drafts or whatever, or research even. So that's like my go-to model right now is Gemini, ChatGPT. Also, Gemini's research is insane. It'll give you like 45 pages of deep research. ChatGPT gives you like 15. And if you go to Perplexity, when people talk about Perplexity, I don't even know why. I've used Perplexity like twice. I'm not impressed. They always say, use it for deep research. It's, in my opinion, it's garbage. I mean, yes, they say, oh, you can, it's not garbage. It's good. It's better than what I could create, but I'm not using it for deep research, right? I'm going to use it for nothing, pretty much.
Figure out like how you can steer it in the direction you want.
Jared and the software team at YC has actually built this, various forms of workbenches that allow us to like do debug and things like that. But to your point, like sometimes it's better just to use gemini.google.com directly and then drag and drop, literally JSON files. And, you don't have to do it in some sort of special container. Like it, seems to be totally something that works even directly in, ChatGPT itself.
Yeah, this is all stuff. I would give a shout out to YC's head of data, Eric Bacon, who's helped us all a lot of this meta prompting and using Gemini Pro 2.5 as effectively a REPL.
What about evals? I mean, we've talked about evals for going on a year now. What are some of the things that founders are discovering?
Even though we've been saying this for a year or more now, Gary, I think it's still the case that like evals are the true crown jewel, like data asset for all of these companies. Like one reason that PowerHelp was willing to open source the prompt is they told me that they actually don't consider the prompts to be the crown jewels. Like the evals are the crown jewels, because without the evals, you don't know why the prompt was written the way that it was. And it's very hard to improve it.
Yeah. And I think in abstraction, you can think about, YC funds a lot of companies, especially in vertical AI and SaaS. And then you can't get the evals unless you are sitting literally side by side with people who are doing X, Y, or Z knowledge work. You need to sit next to the tractor sales regional manager and understand, well, this person cares, this is how they get promoted. This is what they care about. This is that person's reward function. And then, what you're doing is taking these in-person interactions, sitting next to someone in Nebraska, and then going back to your computer and codifying it into very specific evals. Like this particular user wants this outcome after after this invoice comes in, we have to decide whether we're going to honor the warranty on this tractor, like just to take one example. That's the true value, right? Like, where everyone's really worried about, are we just wrappers, and what is going to happen to startups? And I think this is literally where the rubber meets the road, where if you are out there in particular places, understanding that user better than anyone else and having the software actually work for those people, that's the moat.
is that is just like such a perfect depiction of like what is the core competency required of founders today. Like literally like the thing that you just said, like that's your job as a founder of a company like this, is to be really good at that thing. And like maniacally obsessed with like the details of the regional tractor sales manager's workflow. Yeah.
And then the wild thing is it's very hard to do. Like, have you even been to Nebraska? The classic view is that the best founders in the world, they're, sort of really great cracked engineers and technologists and just really brilliant. And then at the same time, they have to understand some part of the world that very few people understand. And then there's this little sliver that is, the founder of a multi-billion-dollar startup. I think of Ryan Peterson from Flexport, really, really great person who understands how software is built. But then also, I think he was the third biggest importer of medical hot tubs for an entire.